artists in kind.
I mean, certainly the 70s is the period that we associate with the vast majority of his prints, so that may be what's really coming through in the prints specifically that are displayed here. It's really not a medium that we see him engaging in before the mid-60s for the most part, but then the 70s are really the time that so many, and 79 is the date of the jazz series, which is certainly a, I think for many people, a great example of the printmaking that he engaged in. And then into the 80s as well, but certainly maybe 79 might sort of come across to you as kind of this climax of, building up over the course of a decade with all these interactions with these various printmakers. And so I never thought about it specifically in terms of that date, but I think that we could sort of pull different things together to see that.
But remember, let's go back in history, because let's say that Bearden knew, he didn't maybe consciously know it, but he was an artist inside at birth, and so he started out on this path, and he was doing cartoons in college for magazines, so that's, fine line ink drawings. He came out of that through more ink drawings, and then, it's the time when in the 50s and the 60s where the center of the art world is moving from Paris to New York, and abstract expressionism is coming over. He worked in abstraction for a time, because everyone else in New York was, and it was like he was really trying to get out of who he was. So he still has his full-time job. We've gone through the 40s and 50s. He's later in his life as a man too. He's late 40s at this point. In the 50s and the 60s, he's coming out of a critical historical time in our own history, and then is Spiral, this group where he's surrounded by artists, working with people all the time, talking, and then he has this idea, well, let's have this cut and paste project type of thing. And they're like, well, I wasn't thinking about that, but if you want to do something like that. The 60s, the mid-60s, the projection series, the black and white projections, what Deidra's talking about, that was 1964. So that's when he was, I think he just exploded. Who he always was came out. Because that's when he really he got into collage, and he's like, yes, this is who I am, and now I can say what I have to say in this medium. So, it's, and then it continues to ramp up. So I think that's an excellent point, like right when you get in the 70s. He's already been working for 10 years, but now he's mid-50s. He signed with a gallery. He's been working for a good solid decade full-time in his art. So this is really critical.
Right, I was just thinking, it just seems unusually productive, because you look at all these prints like the Lamp and, Homeless Mary Rose, these are just landmark works.
Yeah.
It just appears like he was at the pinnacle of his printmaking.
Everything. This was going on simultaneously. I mean, just imagine everything that Deidra's told us about who he is as a person, all these interests that he has. He's doing that. He's working in collage. He's doing solo shows. He's doing group exhibitions all over the United States, some international exhibitions. I mean, when you're on fire, you're on fire. It was, and
I think sort of, feeds into this ramping up.
Yeah, and I think he was also probably surprised and excited about the results he could get in printmaking. And and printmaking is one of those very intense. When you have a master printmaker you're working with, I can imagine you don't leave. You're not leaving that place for a year or two. So yeah, a lot of stuff gets done. So he's probably thinking, okay, okay, you did that piece. Okay, now the train. All right, let's see what we can do with the train now. And it's an intense process. And then you leave. So I can certainly see why he would be excited about the process, and there would be an explosion of this. And it's all about access with printmaking. You have to have access to the press and the printmakers. And so, it was a moment. But, we're right. I mean, he has more time now, and he's been prolific his whole life. Just working all of the time and working a regular job. So this kind of productivity was nothing new, I don't think, to him.
I was just thinking that the collage, an approach to collage is such a good, or it's so well linked to certain printmaking techniques, particularly like silkscreen, because it's an additive product. You know, you do one screen of a certain color. It's like these building blocks that I think collage feeds very smoothly into that approach.
You're right. Although he did the whole gamut of printmaking. He starts with collograph, which is very much like collage in a way. Some of these plates were made out of building up cardboard on the surface and then covering it with gesso and then printing from there. So that was something that he could definitely relate to. And I think in all of them, lithography, serography, however you want to say it, and then he does, you know, etchings. So it's, I think he runs the gamut. But that's a good point about the buildup. I'm sure some of the ones that look most like his collage, we probably would find are serigraphs. What do you think?
But there's a lot that are
the
also
lithographs he did
related to collage, to actual
collages.
collage.
Yes,
So.
yes. Some of them are related. Some of them he did just for the print. Yeah.
Right there, and then back there. You, yes.
The three of you work together so well, so thank you very much. Now, I'm going to then do something dirty, which is drop a question on you that troubles me, and I can't, it's like I get to pass it to grown-ups. What do you think, where do you think Bearden would be around the question of race? And we touched on it here, and I was very uncomfortable. Of how we place him, like an African-American artist or an artist, given today, right now, not, and it's an impossible question because I'm asking the experts really to intuit a dead man's thoughts into the real world today. How would we, was that even a question?
Well, are you thinking how would he perceive race in terms of art right now, or himself, his own identity, or
how we categorize him as, say, an American artist versus an African American artist?
Yeah, because I get real antsy, and I'm of the age where I need to fight to even get women artists or African American artists into the legitimate quote unquote field of art. You had to, I mean, we had to fight to do that, and so I get a little bit scary when. Now we're saying it's like race doesn't exist and it was all of.
I can comment on it from a business perspective, and not that it doesn't matter, because it's absolutely integral to who you are as a person in your own personal experience. From a business perspective, when we look at it, when we look at art, we want to say that's just great art. And because every single artist brings their own personal experience to every single thing they do, that, to me, that's why we're just repeating that, because that's obvious. But why do we say that Rauschenberg, we just don't go on and categorize, oh, white boy from Connecticut. You know, we don't have that. You know, it's kind of like where I'm saying, you know, in the beginning, labels. Every time you put one label on someone, the box gets smaller and smaller. And I want to enlarge that just from a business perspective and say, this is great art. Now, if you want to talk about the artist.
All honesty, I would not have gotten up on a Saturday morning at 10 o'clock to come down and hear a great artist talk, or a panel talk about what are essentially African-American images, and in particular, so many African-American female images. I don't want, well, at this point I've collected degrees, so I know an awful lot about what people think about. I want to know what the African-American, so what pulled me today is the fact that we were talking about an African-American man and his images of the black world, and in particular black females.
Absolutely.
So theoretically, as an academic, I agree with you, but I know in my day-to-day life, nah.
But I think that's excellent that you brought it up, because it's part of the whole conversation. And I think that what Laura promotes here is that this is a place where we can have this conversation. And you should always look to Green Hill as a safe place where, in a visual way, you know, we're using visuals to start a conversation with each other about tough issues that maybe we go outside these doors and it's harder for us to sit down and say, well, this is, you know, this is what drew me in today because this is pinnacle and this is important to what I'd like to hear is in the context of this. And I'm, you know, and then you have a panelist who says, I'm going to bring more on this because I want to promote this person from legacy from a certain point of view, and I want to bring it out more universally from what I do. So I'm also looking at it from a small perspective myself. And then Alison brings it out in a different way as Diedra does. And I think that's what Laura tries to do here, bringing lots of perspectives. We, you know, I'm not afraid to say that in my own environment and my own workspace, I feel consistently isolated, you know, just in the day-to-day and running the gallery. And that's why it's important to be a part of other things and hear from you what's important to you to continue the legacy of a great visual artist who is an African-American man.
And you know, there are artists who have very particular ideas, artists that do not want to be categorized as an African-American artist for obvious reasons. And there are a lot of African-American artists whose work is certainly much more broad than that. And this is, I think, a particularly sort of loaded issue when you talk about abstract artists, whose works are often more disconnected from, say, the African-American heritage than Bearden's work is, which has a much stronger connection. You look at a work by an abstract artist and it's almost impossible many times to tell who did it, male, female, black, white, anything else, because you don't have that same level of, say, biography that you have with Bearden. So in one sense, I don't know, and I wanted to jump in before Diedra because I think that she'll have maybe different things to say from her perspective in knowing his work. But I think that there is, on a certain level, a way that we need to think of him as a great American artist, because there are so many things about his art that are so universal and that he is so well known in that regard that is certainly, you know, the way that we might best categorize him. But I think that, and that may have been how he wanted to have been thought, and that's a question I can't necessarily answer. But I do know that given that what we've talked about with his activism, his acknowledgement of his heritage in America, as well as kind of this African heritage, and as you look around, there are so many works that really, the slave ship work and the roots print, and many of these works that evoke that African American heritage, as well as sort of, you know, his personal experiences, whether it be images of African Americans in the sort of rural South of his childhood, or that kind of urban vibe of something like the block that we were just talking about. He never shies away from representing those experiences that to him were very personal, and that he does, in a way, make it very universal. And so as someone who does not have a background in any way, shape, or form related to the background that Bearden had, I can look at his works and get some sense of what this must have been like. So I think that the promotion of African American art, the book that he wrote on a history of African American artists, the works that he created, I think that he was proud to be an African American artist, not necessarily just an African American artist. But you know, I would be really interested in hearing your response.
Yeah,
to this.
I'm looking at the time because this is a big topic. Okay, this is a big topic, and I unfortunately have a lot to say about it. But you know, one of the things I think we need to worry about is this idea of taking an artist's thoughts and ideas and bringing them into the future. Okay, this is a complicated time for race right now. I don't even quite know what to call myself, right? You know what I mean? We're still having these dialogues, you know, post-black, I think that Romare spent a lot of time, and we don't even have to make it up or guess. he was insisting that, you know, these figures that so prominently show up in his work with black skin was a universal figure. He did not, I mean, he wrote articles about artists who were trying to do other things, like trying to paint like European artists, Impressionists. And he's like, you know, use what you know. Use what you know to make it your own. You know, take in, like his famous quote, be a whale, take everything in, and then show it. And so I think, though, you know, even at the time of the National Gallery exhibition retrospective, this is the National Gallery of the United States of America, right? And he is the first African-American artist to have a solo show in 2004. That was big. Now, they didn't even promote it like that, which is great. They wanted to promote him just as an American artist, and I think that it's very important because he was insisting that these images were of Americans. Okay, so, you know, and we all participate in that, whether you grew up in Charlotte or you grew up in New York, you know, this is a part of American culture. And so I think he spent a lot of time saying, you know, we don't need to call ourselves Black Americans. I mean, we don't need to call ourselves Black artists, sorry, Black artists. But on the other hand, it's very important that he exists. It's very important that these images exist. It's very important that he's in the National Gallery in 2004 as finally a solo artist. So I think that, you know, it's still complicated. If he were up here on this panel, he would, you know, laugh and roll and think that, oh, this is funny that we're still talking about this because I wrote all those articles. Because what artists were being forced to represent in their work was being debated. You know, here you have the philosopher Alain Locke saying that artists needed to put in African-inspired work, you know, things into their work to make it legitimately Black because these ideas needed to be promoted. And yet you had artists who wanted to just paint, you know, like I was on a panel with Buford Delaney, and they were saying, you know, well, he was hiding from his heritage. He was living downtown, and he was painting these abstract works, and he was trying, you know, he'd go up to Harlem, you know, and he, you know, but he wasn't, you know, he didn't want to be seen as a Black painter. Why? Because as soon as you put brown figures or something, then, you know, there's this assumption or stigma that comes into the work. Bearden was not afraid. He was not afraid to have them there, but with the insistence that this is American culture. I'm a painter of my time, and, you know, I'm insisting that these figures come into our lives, expand our mind, collage in a way that was exploding. So you come to some of his, you know, really intense collage works of the 60s, and you wonder why he's using collage, because he's breaking up that surface. It's not what you think it is. When you look at this figure, it's not who you think it is. You're not going to make assumptions about who these people are, who their life, what their life is. But when you see African mask and different eyes and, you know, large hands, and this disruption of space is a disruption in what we're used to seeing, at least, and trying to come into something new. So yeah, if he was on this panel, I think he would laugh at us. He would laugh at this idea that people are still struggling over this idea of race, but he would insist that it be here and be part of the conversation. I have more, but I think we're...
I just have one question. Bearden spent a great deal of time in the Caribbean. My question is, what was his relationship like to the Afro-Caribbean community in New York, aside from also the African-American community?
Well, in the 70s, you know, Bearden was married to Nanette Bearden, who is my aunt, you know, if that's not clear. But it was her family, our family, that had, you know, had the heritage in St. Martin. Both of Nanette's parents were born in St. Martin and had migrated, or immigrated, sorry, to Staten Island, New York. Believe it or not, there's a whole community of folks from St. Martin there. And so they came there. And so when they went to St. Martin and was starting to spend time and decided to build a home, you know, he already goes into a community of knowing people. Now, the interesting thing is, like I said earlier, about him being fascinated with the culture and the Obey